No major crisis for the moment, but as always, the crisis can be looming around the
They
corner.
come, they come.
You never knowing the shape, size of
Expect them
color.
to come. Everything else is
I
too
mean, there is
difficult.
this super weird thing, of course, of the first time in 3 years, and it feels like the same, but it also feels like it was a million years ago. It's so crazy. Absolutely.
Yeah, but I mean, of course, we've been doing the festival every year, so I just feel okay now. Again in this shoes. Like all the partners are suddenly so active. We want to come. We want to do something.
What is the venue for this edition?
It's the same one as last year, so we're going to use the campus again.
The campus.
And we dedicated several buildings purely to exhibition. So we have the cyber arts exhibition this year also on campus, which is going to be fantastic. I'm so excited about that.
The post is over, it cannot be used anymore?
No, so nothing happened to it yet
But
because
it's
in the
about
pandemic they stopped everything. But now they're starting to take it down and to rebuild whatever. But it's okay. I mean, honestly,
Those were really
from an
crazy years.
organizer
You
side,
walk a lot.
no, also we don't have the budgets anymore to use that super huge building. I mean, you need a lot of program for that building. And we do have a lot of program, but this is a different dimension.
Exactly.
So, even as, I mean, of course, we could use just several areas, and it would be again a wonderful place. But on the other side, having that campus with all this outside opportunities, this park and the lake, you know, this is a different vibe of the festival. I don't, and that would not be the goal, to be honest.
I don't know. It would have like a feel of going back home, in a way.
In a way,
so many
yeah.
years.
You
were too young.
I never did a festival in Bruckner House. I started with Post City, so that's the only size I know, which is also a problem, to be honest, because I will always go in that direction. And then Martin tells me like, okay, there have been festivals that are different before. And I was like, yes, I know, but I don't know how they look like.
Look at the documentation of the kids.
Yeah, but you know,
No,
you
I
don't
remember
get-
like the symposium at Bruckner House. The scale of the
No, of course.
big enough and small enough.
For symposiums and for gala and those things, it absolutely makes sense. But for the exhibition, you know, you can imagine.
For the exhibition, the lobby was approaching. No, of course.
You don't have space, you don't have an exhibition environment where you can really start telling stories.
No. Oh, well, you had the Oka and you had the center.
Yes,
And the Oka. Yeah, and Lentos is not being used a lot anymore, right? Or is it?
No, it's an exhibition about Latin American artists. So that's not a movie. Exhibition type works.
And then, what happened with that universe to organize one years ago? Do you remember?
Yes, it was a school. Yeah, but that was temporary also. Yeah. No, it does, it does. But it's not the ideal venue. I mean, there are better ones, and I think, frankly, the one with the university is certainly a better one. And we have built a new building, so we can use it for everything that we wanted to do. But now we're getting there. Should we?
Pues que cierre.
We can also continue.
Yeah. What year did you start being head of festival?
2 years ago. 1 year, 1.5. So I was officially announced before last year, actually. Very new, very baby steps still. No, we did. Yeah. I mean, I've been doing the festival before, just in different positions.
Of course.
More always on the exhibition side.
Hola. Oh. Not yet.
I don't think we're supposed to say something.
It's nice as a retro feel too.
I don't think we can say any. Maybe? No, I have a. Should we maybe start?
Yes.
I think we need a microphone.
Now, yeah. Bona tarda a tothom. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us in this keynote, one of the other keynotes at ICEA. My name is José Luis de Vicente. I'm a curator and researcher who've been working in this field, like all of you, for a long time. And we were discussing, both with the organization of ICEA and with Christl, that this really feels like a really momentous week in a way. Is after this long journey of the pandemic world, this week is full of physical gatherings. We've just had this last weekend, the European Bauhaus Festival in Brussels, which has been a big gathering. I literally come from the install of Sonar, which, as many of you may know, is a big arts and music festival that starts on Thursday. So yeah, I'm coming from install to current event. And Christl, actually, the big festival in which she is involved, Ars Electronica. I don't need to say a lot about Ars Electronica, but I will say now. They had today the announcement of the winners of the START Prize. As many of you know, the START Prize is a European Commission prize that recognizes the cross-pollination and influence on art and industry in projects together. And funnily enough, one of the two award-winning prizes is a Holy Plus project by Holly Herdon, which took place in this very same stage, in this room in which we're speaking, as part of the previous pandemic world edition of Sonar Festival last October, which feels about 3 million years ago, and it was only 8 months ago. Everything has been very intense. But the focus of this conversation, I think, it's about this specific moment in time and the moment in which we are headed. I don't think, again, that I need to say a lot about Ars Electronica, but I will. Christl is the current head of Ars Electronica Festival, which is the, I don't want to say father, because that sounds very patriarchal, but really the origin of most art and technology, art and new media festival. Started in 1979 in the Austrian city of Linz. I personally have had a lot of experiences throughout the last 20 years in this place, which has been a great gathering spot for the community, and was one of the first places that formulated the necessity for a common space that transcended the limits and the boundaries between the art community, the research community focused both in technology and in the social, political, and aesthetic implications of new technologies, and more increasingly in the last few years, how this crosses over to society and our current sense of systemic crisis through many fields and many contexts. The coming edition of Ars Electronica in 2022, in next September, at the other end of the summer that is about to start, is looking at what is, of course, one of the big conversations of our community today, the multiple implications of our current systemic crisis around what I like to call the planetary crisis, to think about climate change, but also about the biodiversity crisis, which we always tend to forget, and is as important as the climate change crisis, and how this forces us to think about alternative ways of imagining the configuration of our society, the way that we live, the form in which we relate ourselves, and it stresses something which personally I'm very invested on, which is the idea that we do not only need political will, we do not only need technological innovation, but we also need a cultural and even an aesthetic reconfiguration of imagining the way that we live. And the artist community has a very important role to play there. Coming back to this weekend, the whole formulation of the thesis of the new European Bauhaus at the European level basically is trying to say that the green transition, the Green New Deal at the European level also needs, looking for that referent of the Bauhaus, an aesthetic that will be developed along with it, and an aesthetic project, an artistic project that will accompany this process. And in 2022, Ars Electronica is using one of the most famous sayings of the ecological movement, the idea that there is no planet B, to actually look at the possibility of what does it mean, this planet B, which of course does not exist, as much as Elon Musk trying to convince us that there is a future 2 planets from ours. It doesn't seem likely in the short term, but that forces us to think that the way in which we live is not, there's nothing immutable about the way that we live, but actually the capacity to forge and to imagine other ways of configuring the parameters of reality is something that is going to be necessary, as not only another world is possible, another world is sure. Another world is guaranteed. It comes to us to define the elements that will make it up, and the imaginaries and our capacities to create a new imaginary that allow us to think about new forms of living in this space. Christy, thank you so much for joining us for this talk. And we're really happy and eager to have you with us and to listen to you.
Thank you so much. I think we can just go into the discussion. You've mentioned literally almost everything I wanted to say. No. Thanks so much for having me. Thanks to Paula Sia, to the wonderful team here in Barcelona, and of course, greetings from Gerfried Stocker, the artistic director of Ars Electronica, as unfortunately, short notice, he couldn't come. But I'm stepping into rather big shoes, so have some patience with me. What I wanted to talk about is actually this feeling of living on the edge, and I couldn't find a better word than the Japanese word girigiri, which is quite a narrative approach of, if you walk on this small path across the mountain, right and left, you have this huge deepness, and you don't know how to juggle. On the one side, it's really an excitement, this adrenaline that kicks in. On the other side is this feeling of danger. And I feel that our society for the past years, but it's coming more and more to this tipping point, we are living in such a situation. And, it easily becomes the worst part of the day when you turn on the news. You hear about the war in Ukraine, how a global equilibrium that has been established over the last decade is falling apart. We are struggling to discuss as societies of how we can handle that situation. On the other side, we have the climate crisis, this dooming situation above us. We don't know how to deal, what to start, where and how, and it's a lot. And especially when thinking about the role of festivals, when thinking about why do we exist and what do we need to do, why do we bring people together, why do we invite artists and creatives into our community, what questions do we ask them? And we always talk in that context about the future, and there are different ways of thinking about the future, and it is this when and what question. And when, I think, is easy to solve. I mean, it's just the next moment ahead of us. It's very passive. We wait for it to come, and then it's the next. But more about this, what is the future? So what futures do we want for us? What decisions do we make so that we reach the future? And futures can maybe not only be in singular, but it's more and more establishing that we talk about futures in plural, actually, even though I don't know any language where it actually exists in plural. We need to talk about this what? How can we reach that future? How can we transform? What responsibilities we need to overtake in order to create that futures that we want for us as a society? And it is, of course, not only the what, but it is also the where. And I mean, those memes and images are popping now up everywhere online. And somehow the big entrepreneurs, the tech giants, the inventors of our digital world, they feel that escape is the solution somehow, apparently. I don't know why. They invest all their money into leaving this planet Earth, but the question of where, I mean, it's disappointing, but of course it is on our planet Earth, at least in my understanding. I don't see any possibles that we might leave this planet at some point in real. And it's on the one side, they look outside our system, but on the other side, I mean, we all know those faces. We've lived in the last 2 years in situations where we haven't moved our bodies in 10 hours because we were constantly in calls. So the other escape route that somehow is proposed by us, by those inventors of our world, is into the virtual reality, into a virtual world. And do we really want that for our society? I mean, can we really imagine to go either direction or, in the other? I don't think so. And I mean, when we look at that, of course, this is an image, but behind all the system that we are using on a daily basis, there are technical infrastructures, there are people that are exploited behind that. I mean, talking about clickbait and everything else. So I think when we talk about our digital system, we very easily link it only to a small number of inventors, of creators. But this is quite different. I mean, look at this graph. It's dramatic how the world population rose with the invention of digital technology. And we need to see that the development of humankind is intrinsically coupled with the technological processes. And this is, I think, one super perfect image to imagine that between those two images there are only 25 years. So we've, as humans, we've invented that technology that made out of this pixely black and white graph an actual planet. This is Pluto, the dwarf planet. And this in a mere amount of 25 years. And we need to think about this crazy development of digital technologies and add another layer of that kind of who is responsible for the success story of our systems. It is not only the very few, but it is us as humanity, us as society. And I mean, when we look at this success story of digital technology and the achievements of those very few pioneers, we need to change the narration. We have, you see the graph here, and only in the last 60 years, and I mean, many of you have been alive in the last 60 years, the world population doubled. And this is, of course, always increasing with, the wealth, with the inventions, and with everything. But there is this very important year in 1989 when Tim Berners-Lee kind of opened up the access to the World Wide Web, which is connected, or which falls into the same year as the fall of the Berlin Wall. And when we talk about the digital world, we should go beyond those few inventors, but actually think about those events in history. It is the collapse on the one side of a system of the Soviet system that allowed then for a dramatic rise in capitalistic. I mean, it is the win of the capitalistic system somehow to take over. And now this started another rally. It started this access rally that a few get more and more, and just in the last 2 years. And I mean, what you see actually here in this graph is the accumulation of private wealth and the numbers of billionaires on that planet. And this is already an old graph, but I couldn't find a better one. But in the last 2 years, during the pandemic, when the largest number on our planet of people on our planet were actually suffering under those conditions, the 10 richest people even got double of their, of their wealth. They reached more and more of that. And every 30 days, another billionaire was so-called created. And we cannot look at the future without considering also the shifts of our demography of the digital world especially. And it is somehow super exciting that we have now 5 billion people that are connected to the internet worldwide. I mean, this is huge. I mean, we're not talking about a small crowd of people. But then when we talk about what is the biggest community on our planet, this becomes problematic because it is actually Facebook. It is almost 3 billion people that use Facebook on a monthly basis, so they are active users. This is not just, people that made an account or some sort of bots or something like that. But this is a global community across borders, across continents, across societies, across languages. And when we look at a different community, it is the Christian community that is the second largest group with 2.2 billion people. And I'm not sure, I mean, I don't think we can compare this, or at least I don't know how to compare this directly, but I think it's important to look at the scale of our digital world. It's important to look at what we talk when we talk about our digital technologies, how many people are connected to that. And it's difficult, and maybe with this comparison, it's a bit easier to grasp the sizes. And when we speak about, of course, internet access, we need to talk about also about the daily time spent online. And this is horrific when we look at that graph, because the average is 7 hours daily. And the highest number, which is also quite interesting, is in Africa, with actually more than 10 hours, followed immediately by the Philippines. And what is quite interesting about this graph is that on the left side of the average usage, we see mostly countries that we consider from a European perspective as third world countries. If we wanted to say nicely, it could be emerging economies or something like that. And on the right side, we see the traditional, the industrial countries, the European, the American countries. And I don't know what that means, to be honest, but I think in the discussion that we have on a political level, but also, of course, within our society on a personal level, we don't take this into account. We always talk about, and this is, of course, still true. I mean, our technology is still rooted in the US. I mean, most of our technical systems come from there. China is really picking up the speed, and I mean, and Europe is somehow trying to be behind there with, of course, luckily a different approach. But when we look at the number of people, and I think in the European countries, in the Western country, probably around 90% of the people are connected to the internet. But if we look at Nigeria or China, only 40% are connected yet. So this is a huge market on the one side if we talk about capitalism. And on the other side, this is a power that is going to change our systems. This is going to change the equilibrium in our discussion. And we don't talk about that yet, at least not, at the rounds that I've been. And especially if we talk about Nigeria, I mean, the systems that are implemented there, they're certainly not Nigerian companies that set up the internet system there, the data routers and servers and so on. So I think this is a topic that we need to continue to talk about. And then, of course, we are moving into an area that connects humans with machines even closer. I mean, we are able to hack computers, and it's not going to be long before we're able to hack human beings. We, of course, need a lot of computing power. We need a lot of biometric power. But with the biometric sensors that we are starting to carry around with us, I mean, talking about Apple Watches and so on and so forth, we are constantly collecting data that is transferred into a language, into what computer can then analyze. And this is not a dystopian scenario, but I think it's important to be aware that whatever we're doing, every step that we're taking, every decisions that we're making, and this not only on the political dimension, of course it is, but not only, it is also about how we individually are engaging with those technologies and being aware of what is not too far away anymore. And in the end, with whatever we hand into those systems, at some point they might be able to hack our feelings. And just imagine, a state like, I don't know, North Korea or something like that, where one of the inhabitants watches a talk by the president, by the dictator, and he or she loves and, smiles at that presentation, but her heartbeat raises up and, the watch or, the sensor on their arm, they actually detect anger. I mean, I'm not sure what chances of, survival this person might have in several years. And by meaning that, it becomes a threatening question, who is in power and who is the one that is controlling the data, who is the one that is analyzing and who is the one that is making decisions based on that. Do we manage a society to create global regulations? Because this is not something, of course, that we can do on a national level, but much more on a global one. And on the other side, the problem is that technology fails us. We trust so much the system that we often don't even think about that they could have mistakes, that it could have flaws. And there's just one example that in the UK postal services, several hundreds of officers have been prosecuted because they were accused of stealing money. And I mean, they destroyed their families for several years. I think it went on for 14 years. And then only afterwards, they came across a mistake in the system of the post office, where just some calculations went wrong and there was actually no theft ever happened. But we rather think about that humans did something before we accuse a machine of making a mistake, or before even considering that this might be the case. And talking about those topics, I mean, what is the role of the community that we are out here, the community that we represent here, the artists and the creatives? And you might have come across the wonderful work by Simon Weckert, Google Map Hacks. It's a work that won also something in the Prias Electronica 2 years ago. And just as a background image, the video of Simon. So what he did actually, he he took 99 cell phones, he activated the GPS sensors, and then he walked for 2 hours over a bridge in Berlin, forth and back, forth and back. And he created a virtual traffic jam on Google Maps that led to the situation that, of course, all the cars in Berlin, usually there's always traffic on that bridge, took another route. And suddenly the inhabitants of that street were able to enjoy this quietness. And this is the kind of the artistic capital, the way that we can hack those systems, that we can make them our own again, that we can think about their flaws in the way that we use them for ourselves. And I think when looking at such kind of works, I become confident that we can deal with the situations that we put ourselves in. Another one is a project that I came just recently across. It's by 2 young students, actually, still, Hyung-Soo and Natalie Rivera. Hyung-Soo comes from Taiwan and Natalie is from Colombia. And by now they're studying in Berlin, but they've developed that project actually during the pandemic when they were still both in their individual countries. And I mean, Taiwan, both those countries are rather under political oppression. Taiwan from the Chinese side, but Colombia more from their own political parties. And what they did is actually, I'm just playing the video as a background. But maybe you can turn off the sound, please. Thank you. And just quickly talk about it. So what they did is they took the Hong Kong movement as an inspiration of an uprising, of a global uprising, of a local uprising of the citizens of Hong Kong, took those umbrellas as a symbol and connected this with the intelligence of fungi, of mycelium, of the way that they are able to move and adapt and communicate, especially with each other. And what they did is they created a network that allowed the users who had those umbrellas with the networks connected to create an alternative layer so that powers, that politics, that whoever is controlling the network and the internet is not able to shut them down, to turn them off. And like that, they can individually organize protests, movements, activism, groups, without having to depend on public systems, or much more private systems, actually. Look at their website. The video is rather long, but it's really, really a fantastic project. And those 2 works, I mean, I said it already, they really give me hope of how we can deal with those technologies, of how we can hack that. And I really hope that we see much more of those projects, and there are many out there, I know. But we need to talk about also the narration that we are creating. What do we commit to when we invent those words that that our lives depend on in the end? If we talk about artificial intelligence, then, and I mean, you all know that cybernetics, microelectronics, IT, informatics, those are super technical systems, and terms especially coming out of engineering, coming out of more the technical perspective of those systems. And then once we moved to digital revolution in the 70s, I mean, I wasn't alive at that point, but that's what I've heard, that, the community, they got engaged because it was suddenly about a movement, a reaction to an existing system, and it opened up. Virtual reality, of course, was interesting, especially for artists, filmmakers, to create an alternative layer of our reality. And then with, the World Wide Web and especially social media, it completely changed again once we introduced the smartphone and we opened it up to everyone in the end. Suddenly, technology became really accessible to everyone. And then it's interesting that especially those huge companies that collect all those data, they called actually the system big data. And I mean, big data, big brother, it is so close together. And it's interesting that digital technology, which is in fact data technology, is called that way because it's not even trying to hide that digital technology equals surveillance in the end. I mean, our technology only works because we constantly collect data. There is no digital technology without surveillance. It's not the concept. It collects data, it analyzes data, It stores data, it organizes data. That is the purpose of it. And I don't know, in the conversations and when looking at those technologies, we keep forgetting that this is the role of them. And when then, of course, this rediscovery of artificial intelligence, I mean, you all know that it was coined in the 50s, but when that happened a couple of years, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, that suddenly allowed us to address an audience that always were afraid of those technical terms. So, you know, I mean, especially when we talk about the Ars Electronica Center, where our role is to educate and to give access to society. Once we spoke about, you know, cybernetics, everyone was like, okay, I don't understand it. It's outside of my world. But suddenly with this term intelligence, humanists and everyone, philosophers, ethical researchers, I mean, all of them jumped on that and felt addressed to make it their own, to see what is behind those systems. And we know that artificial intelligence is not intelligence. It's so far beyond. It is automated statistics. We might even call it heuristic optimization when you look at this trial and error learning process behind those systems. But it's important how we use our language to express something, because, I mean, when you do a Google search about artificial intelligence, you see images popping up that have, you know, those neurons that have usually bluish, grayish, shiny, robotic human beings, brains, whatever. So what image do we transmit when we talk about artificial intelligence? Completely different to what it actually is. But we are now in that situation, and automatization has been in the last years really this kind of the digitization of our industry. Everything that we did before, we are now doing with computers, or it is controlled by computers. But what we are trying to do is the digitization of thinking and decision making. And I mean, we know so many examples, you know, where AI is kind of supporting. I mean, there is an AI system in America that supports judges in making their decisions. There is an AI system in Austria, for example, in the Office for Unemployed People that supports the offices in making decisions of whether someone should be hired or not. There is an AI system that that helps us with many different things that we kind of want to outsource in a certain way. And at this moment, the AI system only gives a recommendation. At least that's what we're, trying to believe in. But on the other side, we all know, I mean, our time is scarce. We have a lot of different things to do. Budgets are limited. And in the end, it's very easy to say that, the system gave you 3 good decisions, and in the end you're like, okay, whatever, I'm just going with that. Because, the AI system, they have all the data, they have much more knowledge than we have, they can analyze everything rather quickly, so whatever they're suggesting might be good, I can just go with it. So in the end, we are putting the system on a different level. They are technically not intelligent, but we treat them as if they are intelligent. We treat them as if they can make decisions for us, and we take those decisions and communicate them as our own, because no one will say, oh, you're not getting a bank loan because the AI has said so. And then when you ask, okay, why, what's the problem? I mean, no one can answer you that question because no one knows why that decision has been made. So I think the worst perspective is that this dooming singularity, it is not even the threat of that, but it's much more that machines don't need to be perfect. They just need to be better than we are, and they are already better in many things than we are, and that's how we use them already. And the question of misconception of those systems is very much, again, based on the way that we talk about them. And you just do a Google search. I mean, anyone can do that. This is just random examples. And when you search for kind of the new achievements of AI, you will find a million of those different articles. And what is interesting is that it always, on the one side, it's of course always the same 5 companies, but on the other side, it is like AI now gives answers. Machine learning has revealed. AI is learning. AI can detect. So we are giving away agency to a system. it is, of course, not AI that has achieved something. It is always us humans that do something with AI. It is always about the technology. It is about how we use the technology. It is scientists that use AI to analyze in a better way than before how proteins are folded, for example. And the worst thing is that we give away our narration. We give not just away our responsibility, but we give also away the possibility of changing those systems. And when we talk about it, I mean, it's not an issue of AI. It is, I think, an issue of technology in general, that even, you know, way back, we treat technology always as something that came to us, something that is suddenly there. It is technology that did something. It's never us humans that, you know, that do something with technology. And I don't know when it started that, you know, we spoke about it in such a way. And talking about the responsibility, but even more also about the possibilities, it is very much the question of how we can participate in the system, how can we actively engage to make sure that we can change them in a way so that they benefit us humans and represent our needs and wishes. And, you know, I leave it up to you to decide of who or what to be afraid of. And I mean, the first two images, I guess you know, they're very familiar, but this wonderful image that looks like a class photo is actually the technical team of OpenAI, one of the leading companies that in the US that created GPT-3. And they are closely working with Microsoft together. So they all look super nice, they look really friendly. I mean, do you imagine them to be kind of the villains behind those systems? No, I mean, of course not. But I mean, yeah. Sorry. But when when I complain about those things, when we complain about those things, when we complain about the flaws and the faults of our digital world, about our digital, how, you know, our media is jeopardized, how our democracy is going down the drain because of technical systems, because of digital systems, how we all survive the data issues, and everything, we make technology responsible for it. And in a slightly provocative way, I think we should ask of what is the source for this damage? Who is to blame in the end? And I think we need to look on a different layer there. And this, of course, it's not an ideological question, but it's more a polemic formulation. And where is the origin of that technology? Where does it come from in the end? And it comes from us, so we need to make ourselves responsible for whatever mistakes happen through technology, for whatever outcomes, for whatever consequences we now need to suffer. And in the end, it comes down, I mean, this public-private image here, it comes down who owns the digital world. And for the moment, and we spoke about the largest community of Facebook before, that's not a public space. That's not a public space on Facebook. It's a private space that is owned by one person, that is controlled in the end by the decisions of a small group of people. And where are those public places? Where are those places where everyone is accepted, where everyone can decide of also how to act and what to do and how to use those spaces? They're very rare to find. And if they are there, and I mean, of course they are there, but it still always links back to, of course, someone's interest. Someone is providing the infrastructure, someone in the end needs to pay bills, someone needs to create something out of that. And if we talk about data, I mean, data is the currency of our time. And whoever controls the flow of data will control our destiny in some sort of way. And just looking back briefly into history, in ancient time it was kind of land that was the most important, the currency in such a way. And politics or politicians at that time were struggling to control the land. And once, you know, too much land was concentrated into a very few hands, society split into aristocrats and into commoners. Then in the last 2 decades, it was machines and machinery that was kind of the interest, the value, the currency. And again, at that point, when it became concentrated into a very few hands, society split into capitalists and to proletarians. So what do we do with data? You know, I mean, what happens when data gets controlled by only a very few? I don't think we're gonna split into classes again, but probably it's more the discussion then of, do we split into different type of species? You know, the one species that has all the power, and the others that are not really necessary anymore, that don't have a role on this planet anymore. So we need to come to terms with that digital transformation, with that situation that we're already in the middle. And we need to make decisions, and that depends, of course, on political systems and on politics, but also on us individually. And we need to reconquer, reclaim democracy and change democracy in a way that it works again for the needs of our time. And sorry, I don't have the time in mind, but I think hope it's still okay. But so with the Ars Electronica Center, we dedicated the whole exhibition already 2 years in 2019 to this topic of understanding AI and also global shifts. And that was a very important move, because before the center was known as the center of the future. We showed society of what future technologies are about. But in 2019, we shifted that perspective and created an exhibition that is much more a compass, that allows the visitors to navigate into the current technologies and help them to empower, to understand, and thereby, of course, empower themselves to not use those systems, of course to use those systems, but to use them in a way that they feel responsible. And that is, and especially with, you know, the focus of the center very much onto education, a very important change in one of our roles, especially at Ars Electronica. And we can, of course, not externalize technology. Technology is part of our culture. Technology is part of our society for centuries already. And it did not start with Google or Facebook or AI, and I mean, we know that. But I like that image very much, because on the right side, you see, of course, a neural network. We know those schematics of input and output. But on the left side, there is this image by Anastasios Kircher, who created a tabula, which is actually a visualization of a work by Ramon Lull, and you're very much familiar with him. And it's always interesting to see how we believe in technology to unveil hidden patterns and systems, and to create visions, which is, I think, wonderful, and a wonderful trait in humanity and humans, that we look for those hidden powers, and, you know, we try to piece as much things together, and if we put it in the right way, hopefully we can find that answer that we're looking for. And looking at the work and at the vision of Ramon Lull, he was looking for the right combination to put the most important words of the Bible together, and from a mathematical point of view, then prove that God, and in this case, of course, I mean, looking at the century, that the Catholic God is the right one. And he was maybe one of the first science managers. He went to the Pope with that proposal, asking him, come on, support my research, support my project, and I will then give you a machine, a system, a tool that allows you to prove to everyone out there that believes in something different than Catholicism, that this is the only God, this is the right one. And this is an interesting example of how also narration is important, because of course, I'm not sure if Ramon Lull believed that. He was religious, yes, but I don't know if he actually believed that. But what kind of narration you need in order to implement a system, a technology, an idea. And if we look at, I'm not sure, is it starting? Yeah, now it's starting. If we compare those two videos, and if we look at especially this discussion of human and machine, it's super clear. I mean, look at the movement of her acrobatic skills, look at the excitement, look at also how the audience cheers her. That, I mean, yes, sure, of course, humans are way better still than machines. Look, he's rather still clumsy. But that comparison, I think, is a little bit wrong, because both of those videos show the excellence of humanity. We've created that robot. We've programmed him in a way that he's able to do those jumps. So when we think about technology, we should think about how we integrate it into our life, less fight it, or less not only be afraid of it, but much more embrace it in a responsible way. And now we come to the festival theme, which of course has been announced already before. So welcome to Planet B. A different life is possible, but how? So Planet B is certainly not a place. Planet B is more this metaphor that allows us to discuss of how we need to change, of what we need to change, and the emphasis is very much on the but how. So we are asking those questions that that were part of the talk before, but on the other side, it's much more about finding different scenarios, different ways, especially through the artistic community, through collaborations between art and scientists, that show us possible ways of going there, not to a planet B, but of course stay on our planet. And just as a thought experiment, we try to imagine a situation in 20 or 30 years. The time is not relevant, and then in hindsight, kind of looking back of how much pressure we needed in order to reach that goal. And this thought experiment includes that we have managed to kind of turn around our ships. We have managed to come over climate crisis. We are good again. So we managed to save humanity, as is of course not about saving our planet, but saving humanity. And then in hindsight, what were the tools, what were the technologies, the strategies that helped us to get there? And we're going to have artists and creatives and projects that are hopefully showing us different perspectives and approaches in that context. And sorry, I just need to jump quickly over to one video that I wanted to show in that one.
I en värld där allt fler pratar om virtual reality är vi stolta över att presentera natural reality.
Så det här är alltså natural reality-glasögon. Här får du ett. Här får du ett. Och så tränar försiktigt med hjälp av båda händerna över huvudet.
Ska jag emanera?
Ja, precis.
Ett träd.
Det känns ju till och med kallt.
Nu är det 360.
Det är nästan som man bara vill ta på allting.
Det är ju blött.
Ja, precis.
Alltså när jag går rätt fram här nu så är det precis som att grenarna kommer emot mig här.
Visst är det amazing.
Det är helt amazing.
Yes, so we need all our ingenuity, everything that we humankind can bring together, everything that we can get through technology in order to find a way of integrating technology into our life that is less conflict-based than what it is at the moment, and in order to save humanity on this planet. And we, therefore, I think also need to reinvent humanity probably a little bit. So I hope to welcome every one of you at the Ars Electronica Festival in Linz. Please make sure that you travel there in a sustainable way. And also what I wanted to kind of discuss actually, because I mean, we mentioned before that role of festivals, of such huge events as what we are organizing here. And it is of course not about ignoring and just talking about those facts, but it needs everyone to also think about why are you going to a festival? What are the expectations? Is it just for entertainment at meeting? Or when really seriously reflecting on that, what do you take back home? Does a festival really, or whatever you meet and exchange and learn there, does that really help you to change something in your own society, in your own community, in your own environment, in your own life? And then, the role of a festival can be answered with, yes, we should continue. That is wonderful if we have people that come and then go back home and change something. But if the answer is no, I mean, it was a wonderful event, but I go back and I continue in whatever way, we've been doing that before, then maybe we should also consider not to simply go to that festival, because in the end, we always leave a footprint behind, and we should use the ones, the amount that we still have in a wise way. So thanks very much.
Thank you. They asked me to be sure that we finish in 1 minute, so I don't really have a lot of time to say nothing more. Although I have one super small question, and I have to make this to you. You really radically changed the format of the festival throughout the 2 years of the pandemic with the experiment of the gardens. What did you learn from this? And actually, how has been inspiring and rethinking what a festival is or can be?
I think what the wonderful experience was that I think, especially in the last year, the community really grew together. And at least, I mean, before in Post City, of course, it was a huge building, everyone came and it was this platform, but in the pandemic, while having to stay at home, the festival really became a decentralized one. And the effect, and I mean, I've heard it from many people here in Barcelona, but also from the garden partners around the world, that changing that perspective, thinking about their own communities and what they need to do for their own communities on site, really turned into a valuable learning and something that actually continued very often in many communities way beyond the Ars Electronica Festival. And now, actually, just next week, the garden in Auckland in New Zealand is starting a garden again over there to do their own program, and still under this label of Ars Electronica, which is completely fine, but they do something for their own community there. And I think having that chance to work with such a global community on those individual topics that, of course, are essential for everyone, this is really key of the last 2 years. It also was very clear that this year we cannot do it in the same way. It simply makes no sense anymore. On the one side from organizational perspectives, but also because we hear from everyone that, like here, having that community around us, there is a certain value behind that. We need to question ourselves, yes, but again, there is a certain value, and that was the decision that we need to do again something on site. And that does not mean we go back to whatever we've been doing before, but we've analyzed, for example, the whole structure, everything that is related to the festival, whether we talk about waste management, about mobility, about materials, about communication. And this is not a marketing move, but this is something that we take really serious in terms of transforming the festival. And we always will have a footprint, yes, but in reducing that footprint as much as we can, and especially seeing the festival again as a kind of a testing ground for how far we can get, and also where those limitations are again. And after the festival, we're going to publish a report on that, that of course everyone can also use. We've hired a manager that is really responsible for those implementations also. So that came out of that, the change of perspective again, and the decision to open it up and to meet again on site.
Thank you so much.
Sorry, that was a long answer.
So the program of ICEA continues tonight. Thanks for coming to this keynote, and thanks everybody.
Thank you so much.